Well, while the US president used his national address to claim the war with Iran would end within 3 weeks, there is uncertainty about how that would happen in reality and how Tehran will respond. Peter Hartcher is the international editor at the Sydney Morning Herald, and he explains why reactions in the stock and oil markets today point towards a sharp escalation within this time frame.
Well, the speech was essentially a repackaging of everything else that he's said in the past, and a bit of a revision and a bit of a jumble. So you have to work your way through that. With that, and there are many internal contradictions. This is Donald Trump. So with that caveat, he said initially that on the very first day that this war would last from 2 days to 4 to 5 weeks. We're now in the 5th week. If he goes 3 more weeks, so he said today, 2 to 3 weeks more, that would take it to 8 weeks. The market expectation listening to this speech was that he was announcing an end to the war. So as he spoke and said there's 2 to 3 more weeks, and he talked of an escalation, we saw share prices fall and the oil price rise. So the markets are taking seriously that this is a marker of escalation. The only escalation he particularly mentioned was that he would destroy Iran's electric power generation plants. Now, we know that as a survival matter, Iran has scattered its electric generation system across hundreds of different power plants. So the US and Israel would have to hit hundreds. Now that's entirely feasible. They've hit 12,000 targets so far in 4 weeks. But Iran has said that if the US were to do that, its retaliation would be, and this is the real crunch point for the world here, Girish, Iran has said that it would destroy the oil and gas production capability of the American Gulf Arab allies. So we're talking about the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, and the others. If that were to happen, that would put a severe dent into global oil supplies. And the price that we've seen lately, so before the war, it was around $60 a barrel for Brent crude. At the moment, recent days, between 100 and 120. If that were to happen, the oil price, you'd have to assume, and I think we can pretty confidently predict, if you're taking out some of the world's biggest producers, would go much, much, much higher, and that would be disastrous for the world economy.
Yes, and if that is the case, would he then, be in a situation to hasten that pullout because of what you've just told us, the rising energy prices, but also the fact that domestically Donald Trump's approval rating has absolutely plummeted?
Well, I think that's the reason, the essential motivation for him giving this speech. He didn't have anything in particular new to add. Almost everything he said before. So I think this speech was an attempt to try to win back some public support and maybe to give some shape to the political argument that the Republicans are trying to make. But I don't think it signals either necessarily a pullout or an escalation, because this is just the nature of Trump double talk. But I do think that if the US were to go ahead with that escalation and attack the Iranian electrical power system, because it would not only knock out obviously their lights and refrigeration and everything else, it would knock out their agriculture, because it's all run on irrigated farms. And if there's no power, you can't run irrigation. And that means the Iranian public would have a hard time finding food to survive. And that's why they've threatened such drastic retaliation, which would be world-shaking. And if Trump has good advice, he won't go there. But look, at the end of this speech, I think Anthony Albanese at the press club in Canberra today, he said that it's not clear what the objectives of the war are, and he would like to know what the war aims are. And I think in saying that, he spoke for the whole world.
And Trump has been claiming, now that Iran is asking for a ceasefire. And once again, Tehran is denying that, as it has with the president's previous claims about holding talks. Is the White House in damage control here?
Absolutely. Trump thought that the Iranian regime would completely collapse and surrender within 4 days. That's what the US was telling some of its allies before the war began. So now in the 5th week, of course, that was a complete misjudgment. He thought that the regime would collapse so quickly that they wouldn't have time to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is why he went into this war with no plan to deal with that contingency or to deal with the global oil disaster that we now see unfolding in almost every country on the planet. So he completely misjudged the regime. The regime has a lot more staying power than he expected. The regime is daring him to try and outlast them. So to try and bluff his way through this embarrassment and miscalculation and complete incompetence, he's trying to pretend that the Iranians are begging for mercy, and the Iranians are saying, look, fella, you're mistaking a back-channel communication, which is standard between countries when they're at war, with a negotiation. There is no negotiation. We don't want a ceasefire, and daring Trump to see how much stamina he's got against his falling opinion polls and the rising price of petrol.
And Peter, once again, the US president is threatening to pull the US out of NATO, mostly because none of its member states would heed his call to enter the war or to even help secure the Strait of Hormuz. But do you feel, that there is a fundamental shift in the UK, Europe and Australia alliance with Washington, in that there's no longer an appetite for allies to follow the US into a war they want no part in?
There has been a fundamental shift. There's been a severe degrading of trust. We've heard from Germany's Chancellor Merz and others in Europe, Francis Macron, that they have to now rely entirely on themselves and cannot put any store by NATO any longer. Trump threatening to pull out of NATO. Well, the US created NATO. So in a technical legal sense, it would be difficult. The Congress would have to endorse that. But in a practical sense, he's already drained it of much of its meaning. So because he didn't bother consulting or advising any of the NATO allies before blundering into this ill-judged war, they feel no obligation to assist. In the end, he had to bludgeon and coerce the 35 countries which tonight are consulting together in a virtual hookup into helping him post the conflict phase get escorts of oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz by threatening European security. We have some reliable reporting, first broken, I think, by the Financial Times of London, which said that Trump threatened that he would remove all arms supplies to Ukraine. At the moment, he doesn't give them. He sells them to the Europeans and then they pass them on to the Ukrainians, but to even stop that channel. So that's a direct threat to the security of Europe, because it's saying, I would help Russia to crush Ukraine and improve his assault on the rest of Europe before the other NATO allies agreed to start helping with this Hormuz project, which is now being debated tonight by 35 countries, including Australia.
Okay, Peter Hartcher, as always, great to get your analysis on the program. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Girish.